Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is this dress that I am wearing. This is a variation of my Esma top with buttons down the front, and then I've added this gathered skirt with pockets. It's super comfy, and this crinkle rayon gauze that I used is perfect for hot temperatures. So let's see how to make it. Let's talk supplies. Now the first thing you're going to need to do is check out the video for the top that I'm wearing, which shows you how to do the button front alteration. I have that linked below, so you'll need to do that alteration, and then you need to add one more alteration to the top pattern, and that is to cut it off at the waist plus a seam allowance. I would strongly suggest going through making the button neck alteration, etc., and then holding the pattern up, marking off where your waist is, where you want the waistline to hit, add a seam allowance to that. Err on the side of making it too long because you can always shorten it before you sew the skirt onto this. So I've got the two front pieces, the one back piece cut on the fold, two cuffs, a front neck facing and a back neck facing cut out for that part of the pattern. Because this is going to have pockets, I have two pockets cut out. These are 8 inches wide by 10 inches tall, and because I'm using a pretty flimsy rayon crepe fabric here, I went ahead and I fully interfaced the back of the pockets. I've also got 3 skirt pieces cut out. To figure out the width of the skirt pieces, you want to take the width of your bodice pieces and multiply that times 1.3. So I have 2 front skirt pieces that are 1.3 times the width of my front bodice, and then I have one back piece cut on the fold, 1.3 times the width of my back bodice, and I'm talking the full width when it's unfolded. So cut out those skirt pieces. They can be whatever length you want them to be. Again, I would suggest, if you're not sure, erring towards the long side, because you can always cut it off before you hem it to get it exactly where you want it. Let's focus on the pockets first. So the very first thing you want to do is fold up a 1/4 inch hem on one of the short sides, fold that to the wrong side, and then fold it 3/4 of an inch from that folded edge, 3/4 of an inch with the right sides together, and we're going to pin at the outer edges, and we're going to stitch down those outer edges with a 1/2 inch seam. After you cross the fold, go ahead and backstitch. On the other side, I'm going to start by backstitching and then continue off the edge. Once you finish sewing those side seams, you're going to want to take this and turn it right side out. And I'm using this little point turner tool to help me get those corners out nice and flat. If you want your own point turner tool, that is linked below. So once you have this pressed out, then you're going to want to press in all the side seams. And that will look like this. So I've pressed down the stitched edge, and then I pressed each side the 1/2 inch seam allowance down, and then I tucked the raw edge back towards that line that I first pressed. So now I have 1/4 inch, basically a finished hem on the 2 side edges. Do the 2 sides first and then repeat the same thing on the bottom. I just find that working with this stuff, it's easier to go ahead and do your 1/2 inch seam pressed up and then press towards that folded edge, and you'll get a nice neat finish on all sides. Now, before we attach this to the skirt, I need to stitch right along the edge of this. So make sure that you have bobbin thread that coordinates with your fabric threaded in your machine, because you're going to be stitching on the wrong side, and the bobbin thread is what will be showing on the right side. And I like to move my needle position over to do this kind of stitching. And if it's not feeding through your machine, just continue to lift the presser foot and till it starts pulling itself through. Make sure to trim off any extra threads. Now we're ready to take this pocket and position it on a skirt front. So take one of your skirt front pieces, and then you want to go about 2 inches down from the waist and approximately in the center of the piece. The exact positioning of one pocket isn't so important as making sure when you position the second pocket that it is in the exact same place on the opposite side of the skirt. Make sure you're far enough in from your facing that is going to get folded back. So you don't want to be too close to where you're going to be stitching your button facing on the skirt. So I think this looks like a good spot to me, and I'm going to go ahead and pin the corners of my pocket into this spot. Okay, I'm going to stitch all the way around. At the tops of the pockets, to reinforce them, I'm going to do something I call chicken feet. So basically I'm going to stitch in at an angle and then back stitch, and then move my needle and then do the straight stitching all the way around. And I'll do the same thing on the other edge of the pocket. Sewing on these pocket edges is a good time to use my self-leveling foot. And if you don't know how to do that, but your machine has a presser foot with this kind of button on the side, I've got another video linked below that shows how to do that. Even with the self-leveling foot, sometimes you got to be careful at those corners. Make sure your fabric's actually feeding. Okay, here is my pocket stitched on. All right, y'all, I've gone ahead and I've constructed the majority of the bodice. I have sewn on the neck facing, I have pressed and pinned it into place, but importantly, I have not top stitched it yet. So I can still unfold these facings on the bottom edge, and that's going to be important because I'm going to want to sew it to the skirt with that part unfolded. I have also not sewn the side seams or finished the cuffs. And at this point, you can go back to that video for the shirt that I'm wearing and sew the shoulder seams, sew the neckline facings all in place just like I show on that video. Just make sure, do not sew the side seams. Leave those side seams open, but get the neckline facing in place on the bodice, and then meet me back here and we'll talk about how to attach the skirts. So I'm going to open this up now, and we're just going to be working with one front bodice panel at a time. So I'm going to take this front bodice panel and I want to match it up with one of the two front skirt panels. The skirt panel should have the interfaced edge on the same side as the neck and button placket facing here. On the skirt, I have gone ahead and I pressed 1/2 inch to the wrong side, and then I pressed that over again. So my facing placket width here is the same from the shirt to the skirt. The other thing I went ahead and did off camera is I sewed two rows of basting stitches. And to do this, I sewed down and then I turned with the needle in the fabric, took 2 stitches and then sewed across the other way. And now what I can do is I can just take both of the bobbin threads, which I sewed with this wrong side up, so here are my bobbin threads on the right side. And I'm just going to pull those and gather this skirt panel so that it is the same width as the bodice. Notice that I turned before the placket with my basting stitches. And also on the edge here, I want to keep this 1/2 inch seam allowance flat. So now I want to pin these two right sides together. And I'm going to be opening out the placket. I want to make sure to unfold every part of the placket there, match those raw edges, and then pin the rest of my gathered skirt across to the bodice. And now I want to sew and finish this seam, and I want to repeat this process with the other side of the front and also with the bodice back, so that I've attached all 3 skirt pieces to this. You're also going to want to finish this seam once you attach it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this over to my serger, and then I'll show you what this looks like once I've got all 3 of those skirt pieces attached. Here's what this looks like when you're done sewing that seam. And I finished it on my serger, but if you don't have a serger, there is a link below to other seam finishes, including some that you can do with a regular sewing machine. So no serger required. After you've gotten that seam sewn, then I like to press the seam up, and you want to refold the facings. You may want to repress the facing as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and add pins now that that seam is finished. One more thing I want to do to the facing before I top stitch it down, and that is going to help me hem. So when I hem this, I've already kind of draped it on myself, determined how long I want it to be, and decided that I'm going to do a 1 1/4 inch hem. So I'm going to fold it 1/4 inch to the wrong side and then 1 inch, and that's where my hem will be. So what I want to do with the facing is I want to take this outer edge that's going to be visible, and I want to fold it backwards on that line. And then I want to mark it 1 1/4 inches up from the bottom edge. I'm going to stick a pin there. And I want to take that over to the sewing machine and line it up. Okay, pull the pin out now that I've got it lined up, and I want to stitch right across that facing. I'm going to back stitch too. And then once you've done that stitching, what you're going to do is turn that corner so it's back right sides together, and you can see how that's going to help. It's kind of like how we did the pockets. It's going to help me determine that 1 1/4 inch fold there. I will press it again, obviously, before I hem it, but that way it'll behave a little better. And then, of course, that 1/4 inch seam right there. And you're going to have a nice faced edge here on the outside so that you don't end up with a bunch of folds that are visible right here on the edge of the facing. So that's why I'm going to do the hem that way. Go ahead and do that on the other side as well, making sure that you've got the exact same length from waist to hem. And then top stitch all around that neckline facing. And then I'll be back at the camera with you to show you the side seams and then the finished project. Okay, y'all, I've gone ahead and top stitched all those facings down, and now I've also sewn the side seams. So you can see the most important thing when you're stitching the side seams is to make sure that you have matched those waistline seams, and then you're just going to stitch right on down the side seam. And on the front, here is what it looks like. Again, make sure you've matched those 2 waist seams. I would suggest pinning, possibly basting before you do that. And then of course, finish the seam. So the last step is going to be to put on buttonholes and buttons. And I'm not going to get into that because I've got links below about how to sew buttonholes and buttons. And the only thing I am going to say is that when you're figuring out where you want them spaced, you want one close to the center of the fullest part of your bust, and you also want to make sure that one of them ends up pretty close to your waistband. In fact, you ideally would have one just above and just below the waist seam so that you don't have gaping there, because that's another area that gaping could occur. So go ahead and plan out your buttonholes. There's a little more information on that, on spacing out buttonholes on the video for this shirt, which, as I've mentioned, is linked below. Go ahead and do that, and then this dress is finished. And while you're at it, you know that there is this variation and the one I'm wearing. There is another variation or two that is going into that playlist, so make sure that you check those out.